Bibles, we are going to be in Romans chapter 14. The title is called Accepting, and we are near the end because when we look at the outline of Romans, we're into the application portion of it, and then we get to the conclusion this next week. So this has been a great journey through the book of Romans. I don't think we could have picked a better book to do online than this one, because it's not the matter that we don't have too little to say, it's how we have a lot to say, and it could be on here for a long time. Now, one of the things that I want to mention has to do with the body image. That's an extraordinarily important image in the scriptures about who the people of God are. And so every part of your body is important. And we all know that, because when one part starts hurting, you notice it. If your knee gets twisted, you notice it. It's hard to get around. I mean, I do my walk every day, and I have to have my knees, but if all of a sudden it's twisted and it's swelling, I'm not walking. Or you get an intestinal virus or something like that. The rest of the body knows that. But imagine for just a second if body parts could talk.
Your intestinal virus better.
If they could talk, maybe one of them might say, "I am more important than you are," or another part might say, "Well, I'm more important." And so body parts don't do that. As a matter of fact, there are so many times that when a vital organ or something like that is sick, the other parts, they jump in there and they share strength in order to bring health. But when body parts are out of sorts, we call that unhealthy. When they're all working together, we call them healthy. So you're going to see that in play because today Paul is dealing with, when you look at the Romans 14 context, he's talking to a church that has not only mature Christians and immature Christians. Now, when I say immature, I'm talking about either they are young Christians, meaning newly saved, or maybe some Christians who have not grown sufficiently because they are letting things hold them back. And then you got these mature Christians, and there are two different ways of thinking, two different ways of operating. And then on the other hand, you've got Jews who were used to being under the law, and they held very specific things. And then you had Gentiles who came out of paganism. So you got this contrast going on this way, and then you got the mature versus immature contrast going this way. And because of that, there's the possibility of not only disunity, but also judging. So Paul is going to deal with that in this particular part of applying Romans. Now, the guy that you see on there, his name is Henry Codman Potter. He was a bishop back, you see the dates there, 1834 to July 1900 something. Bishop of Episcopal Church, I think they're in New York, and he tells a story on himself. He tells about how he was traveling overseas. Of course, back then he had to get on a ship, and he walked into his room and he met his roommate. He had never met him before, and they talked for a few minutes. Well, after he got through talking, he went to the purser, the guy who keeps all the valuables, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to give you my gold watch and a few other valuables because I just came from my room, and there's a guy there that just looks a little bit suspicious, and I don't want to take any chances." And the purser said, "Hey, no problem. That's okay. As a matter of fact, he just handed me his stuff for the same exact reason." And that's when the bishop realized, I'm judging for the wrong reason, that appearances are not the reason to do that. And I'm sure Matthew 7:1 came into his mind. Who knows what Matthew 7:1 says? Part of the Sermon on the Mount? I'll give you a hint. Judge not, lest
you be judged.
Yeah, lest you be judged. And so he likes to tell that story on himself about judging and realizing that just doesn't work too good. So if Paul's message to the Romans is God's message to us, how do we deal with being accepting? How do we accept one another, especially when you got differences between maturity, immaturity, and maybe different backgrounds? In their case, Jews versus Gentiles. So he says the first thing is this, just plain and simple, stop judging. If you want to be more accepting, you got to stop judging. Now, that brings us then to the first section. And let's see what that section is and read the scriptures. Come on, there we go. It says, now accept the one who is weak in faith, but not for the purpose of passing judgment on his opinions. One person has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only. The one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat, and the one who does not eat is not to judge the one who eats. For God has accepted him. There's that word, accepted him. Who are you to judge? Verse 4, the servant of another. To his master he stands and falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. All right. So this is Paul's declaration, basically saying, look, stop judging one another. Now, the first phrase, or in that first verse, is important for this reason. The subject there, or the verb, is accept, and it says now accept, and because it's plural, it means the emphasis. The subject is you, the verb is accept, and you is plural, meaning you as a group accept. Now, one interesting thing is the words "the one who is weak." Those in Greek, those are the words that come first. So if you read it literally, it says, the one who is weak in faith, you must accept. Now, when you put those words in front of the verb, that's for emphasis sake. In other words, the object. You got subject, verb, object, direct object, all those types of things in English. But in Greek, if they wanted to emphasize something, they would put something first so that you would home in on that. So in other words, for me, those who I think are weak in faith, I need to accept. Okay? So Paul is addressing them as a group. Then he adds this phrase, but not for the purpose of passing judgment on his opinions. Now, perhaps immature Jews who could not let go of their religious ceremonies were struggling, and because it dominated their past, they were harping on that, say, hey, everybody ought to be doing that. Have you ever had anybody that had kind of I guess you might think there was a grace pride? If I do it, everybody should be doing it. Have you ever seen that before? I think we have. I used, this guy who had the gift of service. This is common with that gift. They think everybody ought to be as concerned about the service of the church as I am. So, I mean, if you're not picking up paper, you're a slouch. If you're not doing this, you're a slouch. If somebody with the gift of evangelism, you're not witnessing like I should be witnessing, you just don't care about lost people. That's a common thing within the body of Christ. Well, they may be acting slouchy, but they may not be either. They just may not be as gung-ho and zealous as you are. So passing judgment on the immature people can easily pass judgment. Can you remember when you were a young Christian, how sometimes you thought certain things were a whole lot more important than you think they are now? Anybody ever have that? All I see is head shaking. Nobody wants to confess their sin. Well, that's okay. So we get into those kind of modes, and the Jews were they were coming out of all kinds of rituals, and here they're having to worship with people who don't know their rituals, don't value them. And then on the other hand, what if you were a Gentile who came out of paganism, and you're trying to make this big break with paganism, so you will not eat meat sacrificed to idols? And you're seeing some of these Jews who are getting a nice deal on this meat, and they're eating it, and it's just like, wait a minute, what is this? I mean, I used to be a paganist and idolater, and people are eating meat sacrificed to idols. So can you see the tension that's rising up in the Church of Rome and situations there? So all of these people are on the one hand this, on the one hand that. And the bottom line, or the thing that makes both of them equal, is that weaker Christians or younger Christians, newer Christians, they have sensitive consciences. Take, for example, we just got through saying Elliot and Adelaide. How sensitive are their consciences? How easy can they be provoked? Kids that young. Can you make them cry real easy? Sure you can. That's the nature of being a preschooler. Well, spiritually speaking, young Christians have sensitive consciences. They don't have the same level of understanding. They can't just easily sort through one thing or the other. And what he's saying is, you that are mature, you got to take this into consideration. You can't just judge them because they're not as mature as you are or have the same experiences as you've had. Right? Anybody want to add something at this point? Okay. Now, the words passing judgment on his opinions, some of y'all have probably this translation, dispute over doubtful things. Anybody have that one? They're both basically the same thing, meaning that there are some things that are not just clear-cut yay and nay, but they are doubtful. And so they were disputing over that. Now, verse 2 says, the one person has faith that he may eat all things, meaning a more mature believer sees these doubtful things differently than a young believer sees them. And they have the power to exercise certain amounts of freedom. But what Paul is saying is this: look, don't exercise your freedom at the expense and at the consciousness of these younger believers. Yes, you can use your freedom, but if it damages the consciousness of younger believers, that's passing judgment. You are judging them and not treating them only. For example, what's the good, well, let's back up. How many parents, when you have younger kids, how many of you put aside certain freedoms to take care of your kids? Right? I mean, when Jessica was very young, Angela and I we said there are certain things we can't do until she grows up. When she started growing up and all that, we said, hey, we're going out to eat tonight. You got the house. Because she was older. She could handle it, but not when she's 2. You put aside your freedom. We all understand that. Well, Paul is basically saying this. Just like if you can get the bigger picture as a parent with young children, now get the bigger picture of you being a more mature believer versus younger believers. Don't damage their consciousness because of your liberty, because of your freedom. This is one of my favorite parts. Some say eat vegetables only. So now I can be a judgmental of those. I can judge vegetarians, right?
Paul judged them. He said they're weak in faith. Look at that. Look at the portion right before that.
There you go. Look, I hope I'm not getting in trouble with anybody right now. I didn't see anybody disappear off the side over here, the participants. Nobody left yet. So, but some of them wouldn't. They would not eat meat. Some of the younger Christians back then who had sensitive consciousness, they did not want to take any chances of eating meat sacrificed to idols, so they just ate vegetables only. Now, that's not a bad way to go, is it? Not bad. You lose weight that way. Probably.
Daniel.
The what?
Yeah.
That's right.
Daniel thought it was okay.
Daniel thought it was okay, and he's a pretty good guy. Now, verse 3, the one who eats is not to regard with contempt. Okay? So meaning this, I may think I've got freedom to do certain things. But just because I have the freedom doesn't give me the right, or if I think I'm more mature, doesn't give me the right to judge and despise those who may be younger in their faith, less developed, Paul is really coming against a judgmental attitude. So we have to beware of holding the weak as legalistic and self-righteous for that. The one who eats, let's say, the one who eats does not need to judge or condemn. I mean, they don't need to come to a false conclusion either. So we're holding the strong is irresponsible and depraved. So he's given it both ways. You younger ones, don't judge those who are more mature than you. You those who are mature, don't judge those who are younger than you. Now, he hasn't got into the why yet. There's a question of why that he's going to get to in the next section. So we'll wait for that. But then he brings this one up, verse 4. Who are you to judge the servant of another? Now stop for just a second. What do you think he means by that? Anybody want to venture out? Who are you to judge the servant of another?
We're all God's servants, so we shouldn't be judging his servants.
Okay. Well, in real life, didn't the Romans have servants?
Mm-hmm.
Who was that servant primarily relating to?
The master.
His master, not anybody else's master. And just like this, we believers, we all are servants, but in this case, we're servants to the same master. So who am I to judge somebody else? Yes.
It reminds me of when we were all homeschooling back in Florida, and I realized I am so glad that I get to choose how I raise my children, and I don't have to choose how this other family homeschools their children. You know, we get into that a lot as parents too, trying to judge another child. And that's something that I have to watch for.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're called to a certain thing, you just do it humbly. And you don't judge others for how they do things, because they have to answer to the same God that I have to answer to. All right. To his own master, he stands or falls. So in other words, how the head tells each part in the body how to function, when to do what they do, is up to the head, is it not? It's not up to each part to talk to each other. It's up to the parts to get their messages through the head and to do the function that they're called to do. And when you look at it that way, that makes sense, doesn't it? Now, is there a problem with judging? Yeah, there's all kinds of problems with it. Now, to get into the spirit of that, let me tell you another story. Back in the time when, if you wanted to go get some ice cream, you might, this is back in probably let's say the mid 20th century, where a lot of times you would go to the drugstore. Anybody, older people, do you remember that? And you could get ice cream there. You get a lot of different things. Well, this particular place had, where people could sit down at the counter or even tables, and they would serve. And this little boy came up to the waitress and said, how much is an ice cream sundae? And she said 50 cents. Sounds like the mid 70s to me, doesn't it? That's because I remember I used to work at Dairy Queen, and you could get a sundae for 50 cents. Sometimes even a banana split for 50 cents. Now what are they, $5? 10 times more of that. Well, so he pulls out his change and starts counting it right in front of her. And she's going like, come on, I've got other customers and I want to serve them and do well because I can get a big tip from them. That's what she's thinking on the inside. And he gets through counting and said, well, how much is just a plain bowl of ice cream? She said 35 cents. So he goes back to counting and all that. And she's getting a little bit impatient. He said, okay, well, let me have a bowl of ice cream then. So he gets to eats his ice cream and then leaves it there, and he leaves. When she came back, she got this huge lump in her throat. And the reason why is because when she looked down there, she saw 2 nickels and 5 pennies. It was so important for him to leave a tip to her that he wouldn't get the sundae, which cost 50 cents, and leave her nothing. And of course, then she's like, oh my goodness, I judged this little boy when he was actually, what he was trying to do was have his ice cream and honor me at the same time. That's the danger of judging, is because we sometimes impugn people's motives and we treat them with contempt and treat them as little. Now, so Paul is now going to shift gears a little bit, and he's going to pretty much tell the people in Rome, number 2, you need to honor God. So let's go ahead and bring up the next one. And so he says, one person regards one day above another. Okay, we kind of talked about that. Another regards every day alike. Now notice this phrase. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord, for he gives thanks to God. And he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat, and gives thanks to God. For not the one who lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord, or if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. So section 2 is called honoring God. He says one person regards one day above another. So Paul then, he turns his attention back to the younger, less spiritually mature Jewish believers. They felt that to honor God, I still have to keep the Sabbath on Saturdays, even though most Christians were meeting on Sundays. Hey, we're doing Sunday school on the Sabbath day, are we not?
Mhm.
Right? That's what we're doing right now. Okay. So they felt compelled to do that and keep many of the Jewish holidays as well. At the same time, the weaker Gentile believers wanted to separate. In other words, they wanted to stop doing the special days that they used to do because they associated that with paganism. So one group said, let's keep days. Another group said, let's get rid of the days. All right. And why? Because their consciences told them to do that. One person says that the highest form of morality, in one sense, one of the highest ways of judging your own morality is how do you respond to God? How do you relate to him based on where you are? So, but then again, there's another one. There's another element, those who are more mature. And how do they look at it? Another regards every day alike, meaning the mature at that time, they saw every day as exactly the same. They were unaffected by the Jewish standards or the pagan standards because they had their eyes primarily on the Lord and they had more experience with the Lord, and they tended to see through his eyes more than the weaker Gentiles or the weaker Jews saw when they came to observing days. So what he said is this, to give them perspective. How do you honor God? Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind, meaning this, follow your conscience. Now, these are things that maybe not be specifically commanded in the scripture. What I was trying to say earlier, that a person's conscience before God may be the highest standard of moral law. How would you describe these things? Days and not eating and all that. In this case, Paul, I think this is the secret to understanding all of this. Paul is saying, beware of making too much out of non-essentials. You understand that? There are essentials, there are non-essentials. So, are observing the Jewish days by younger Christians, is that a non-essential? Sure, it is. Is avoiding days by Gentiles, is that a non-essential? Okay, let's put something else to the test. Let's see if this would pass the same test. How about this one? One person thinks to have sexual relationships outside of marriage is a sin, whereas others don't have a problem with that. Each must be fully convinced in his own mind. Does that work? And why not?
Breaking
God's law.
law.
Yeah, it's what somebody was saying something.
It's
I got
God's
Sarah,
law.
okay, I got Sarah Jane. Somebody else was saying something.
I said it's breaking God's moral law.
All right. Are there clear standards in the scriptures about sexual behavior? Yeah. So it's not, you can't just say, this is my opinion. No, you can't be just fully. Now, listen, I have heard that before. I've heard people say, well, you do it this way. I think it's okay. I am convinced in my own mind. I'm sorry. Here's the scripture. These are the verses. And they don't. So that standard of essential, non-essential doesn't work here because those are essential. How about this one? This is even easier to catch. One person says, I am saved by grace through faith. Another person says, I am saved by doing good works and trying to be sincere in my life. Let each man be fully convinced in his own mind. Does that work? That one's really easy, isn't it? And the reason why is because we're talking about something that is essential. So Paul is not talking about essentials here. He's talking about the non-essentials in life. How do you honor God? Well, with essentials, you honor God by standing for the truth and not letting things like that pass by. But in this case, in chapter 14, you honor God by not turning a non-essential into an essential. Does that make sense? Is that clear as mud? Give me a thumbs up, yay or nay, one way or the other. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on that? Anybody else? Yes, Sarah Jane.
Pastor,
Yes.
right now it's so funny to use the word essential because
Okay.
our whole society is centered on what's essential and not. If it's my job, it's essential. If it's somebody else's job, we can get by without them. So it's just very humorous to hear this as taught as essential because we really think about that when we're making judgments. When we hear a doctor, we go, that's essential. That is essential for our life.
Wow.
And right now, our whole government and the whole globe, they say, is centered around what is essential, food and toilet tissue. And you look at that, and your priorities do change when you go shopping or when you schedule your activities. All of us
Hey,
that are old, we're in
don't
there.
leave out marijuana now. That's essential, remember?
Oh, yes, by all means.
You know, the president yesterday, when he got up and made his announcement, he said, I see worship as essential.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, thank you, Mr. President, for standing up for churches. And you're exactly right. It's very perceptive of you to point that out. What is essential versus non-essential? I mean, these leaders are making judgments that certain things are not essential. Your business is not essential. You can buy clothing at Walmart, but you can't buy it at a clothing store. Using this, as a matter of fact, the clothing stores would probably use mask and force that upon you, whereas in Walmart, I can go in there and buy clothing without a mask. So we call that being judgmental and making poor judgments. Well, that's a great insight. All right, anybody else? That's going to be a hard one to beat right there, isn't it? Okay, so verse 6, if you observe the day he eats, he does it for the Lord. Meaning, whether you're strong, weak, Jew, Gentile, who are you supposed to do it for?
Unto the Lord.
For the Lord. In other words, keep your eyes focused on Jesus. That's what matters. And why is that important? Well, we're going to see that in just a second. Not one who lives for himself dies for himself. So in other words, there's a bigger picture here, and that is for Jesus Christ. We live for him and we will die for him, and it's for him. And we're going to be seeing, he's going to make a transition into the next segment. So is there any other word before I move on to the next segment? Okay, then let's move on to the final segment. Remove obstacles, verses 9 through 12. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be the Lord both of the dead and of the living. But you, why do you judge your brother? Or you again, why do you regard your brother with contempt? Now, if I am concerned about answering that question, he gives me a lot of motivation with this next phrase. For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise to God. So then each one of us will give an account of himself to God. Now, if I'm tempted to judge, or do these last verses give me motivation not to judge?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I need to remove the obstacles, meaning obstacles maybe talking about those in my head, or maybe physical obstacles that I've set up that cause me to judge. I need to get rid of those. So to this end, Christ died and lived again. Now, this is the biggest picture possible. When it comes to essentials, the greatest essential of all is Jesus Christ crucified, risen from the dead, so that his body can experience him. So what matters most gives us the greatest perspective. So he's telling all of them, Jews, Gentiles, mature, young, get this perspective, that he might be the Lord both of the dead and of the living. Verse 10, so why do you judge your brother? So a fellow believer in Christ, yes, each part is different, but each part of the body of Christ is extremely valuable. All you have to do is say, get rid of one part of your body, and what's it going to be like? Get rid of your right arm, and what are you going to, you're going to have to make serious adjustments. You'll find out how much you miss that. Anything that you get rid of, there's an adjustment that goes with it. So we're not to regard each other with contempt. And here's the number one reason why. We will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Paul will talk about this more in 1 Corinthians 13. Newer manuscripts call it even the tribunal of God. I think that's kind of interesting. The tribunal of God. So when I stand before God, it's not just going to be the actions that I did that he will judge. You know what else he will judge? My conscience, my motivations, my tendencies toward judgment. He's going to judge everything that does not look like Jesus Christ. Now, if that's not motivation to stop judging, I don't know what else would. Then he talks about what is written from Isaiah 45, 49, and of course, Philippians 2, you'll see these words in there as well. So verse 12 says, each one of us will give an account of himself to God. This is about as big a picture as you can possibly get. All right. Any thoughts about these verses? Okay. All right. Let me close with I've done 2 stories already. I've got a 3rd story. Are you ready for this one? So a traveler between flights at an airport, and we're going to be doing that this coming Tuesday, bought a small package of cookies to kind of eat, right? She sat down and began reading a newspaper, and gradually she started hearing a rustling noise. From behind her paper, she was flabbergasted to see a very neatly dressed man helping himself to her cookies. What is this guy doing? So not wanting to make a scene, she leaned over and took a cookie for herself. Okay. A minute or 2 passed, and then came more rustling. He was helping himself to another cookie out of her package. By this time, they had come to the end of the package, and she was so angry, she didn't dare to say anything, but inside she's fuming. And then to add injury to insult, the last cookie he broke apart, put it and pushed it up to her, and he finished the other half and left. I mean, she's going nuts right now on the inside, and just think, how in the world could this guy be so insensitive? Well, the time came for her to get on the plane. She opened up her purse and to get her ticket. Guess what's inside of her purse?
Her cookies.
Her cookies. exact same package. And all of a sudden now she realizes, oh my goodness, I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who grabbed his cookies, and I'm just going nuts and all that. So,
Pray she'd never see him again.
judge not lest you be,
Judge.
yeah.
That's also a good lesson on communication because they could have just said something and cleared it up real fast.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, so I'm going to ask y'all a question. Now, this is you can do it in your own words. You don't have to be Paul, in other words. But how would you, and so you can kind of say, okay, this is what I learned today. So here is how I'm going to summarize Romans 14, what I learned today. Here's how I'm going to summarize Romans 14 for me. Who wants to volunteer to say, this is what I learned from Romans 14. So this is how I'm going to summarize the chapter. It can be a personal thing. It doesn't have to be the teacher's point of view. So anybody? What did you get out of it today?
See.
I'll say just a reminder to see people through God's eyes, not your own.
Okay, excellent. Look at people through God's eyes.
And I would say, for by the grace of God, there go I.
Okay. Wonderful. Anybody else?
Pastor Jimmy?
Yes, sir. Johnny.
Yeah, I remember this. Now, this is a long, long time ago, but when Carol and I were first married,
Mhm.
we, I don't know what we was doing and what brought it up, but one day she asked me, she says, why do you always have to be right? You know what I'm saying? And you know what my answer was? I said, I don't know, I just am.
Oh,
You know, and that didn't really go over so well at the
And
time.
humble too, right?
But there was a time in my life when I did have to always be right. And when I had a difference with another person, if they didn't see it my way, then they were just wrong. They had to come over to see it my way. Well, there was no person that could take that out of me, take that out of my life. The only way that could have been done was through divine intervention. Today, I don't have to be right. I'm not right all the time.
Mhm.
And I know that. But when I was younger, as far as I was concerned, I was right all the time and everybody else was wrong. But God has seen fit, and it's taken him all these years
Mhm.
to take that pride and that out of my life. And I thank God that he did that. I don't want to be right all the time. If I was right all the time, I wouldn't have to go to him.
Oh, ooh, good point.
So now that I'm not right all the time, I'm at his feet constantly.
Mhm.
So, well, that's what these verses taught me.
Yeah.
Is to not be right all the time and not have to do everything I think is right just because it's right. There are things that I don't do that is simply because not younger Christians, but more immature Christians look down on.
Mhm.
I don't do them because I don't want them to stumble over it.
Right. There's a word for what Johnny was talking about. When you can tame a zealous person, it's called humility. And Johnny, you do display humility, and I appreciate that very much in you.
Thank
So,
you.
That's a great way of saying it. Anybody else? What are you taking with you from today? I lost you, Ernie. Say it again.
Sir Jane wanted to say something.
I did not.
Okay, we didn't want to say anything.
Oh,
I
okay.
just wanted to say, he's been over here choking.
No, I don't have anything to say.
Oh, okay. All right. I can't see everybody's face, so if you or something you want to share, just wave or whatever. All right. Somebody else, not me. I had to give them credit. Said it this way. Perhaps our text can best be summed up by saying, don't judge your brother on non-essential matters because God will judge him. Judge yourself because God will judge you. And like, whoa, man, that hits home.
Mhm.
All right. Hey, today is short and sweet. We're done about 15 minutes earlier than normal. So if there's nothing else left to be said, I think, Angela, I'll need to stop the recording on my end. Is that correct? You're muted, Angela. Do I need to stop it myself? Well, I'll do it anyway. All right, let me stop it.